Um, I won't tell you how it's smarter. I instead take a look at the library. It's got additional things that you can say, hey, don't save it yet, because if you're setting a bunch of defaults, you don't want it to be opening and closing the files all the time. So you can say, and so if I were giving this example and trying to show you a complete example of how to do it, I would do this. Because let's just imagine that I had 100 default settings. If I didn't say save equals false, save equals false, the default is if you set a default value, I use default twice. When you call this function, it immediately opens the file, changes the value, and saves it in a location where it can look it up later. And if you're doing this in your game with 100 settings, that's 100 open and closes, which is really inefficient. So I provided a little flag that you can pass in called save equals false, and it basically says keep track of that, but don't do anything yet. Just keep it in memory, and then on the last one, I just make sure that I don't pass anything because the default is save equals true, and everything I did before gets saved and it's done. So let's just leave that. Hopefully I didn't typo something and mess myself up. Okay, so that's what line 9, we load it, and on line 14 we run it, and at that point the persistent system is ready. It says, I know what the default values need to be, so if I load test 1 and I run it, let's take a look at the code. What do I do here? Localize persist, create a module, I call it test, add a function called run, which in main Lua I am calling test1 run, and in here I simply say, call the persist library get, I say in the file JSON settings, or settings.json, give me the value of volume, give me the value of coins, email, and username. Now, you'll recall that we didn't set username. So let's go ahead and look at test 2, which is loaded in main and executed in main, and then I execute test 1 again. And the reason I did this is because we initialized 3 values, gave them default values. Test 1, its job is simply to print out what the values are, and I'm looking for a username, which does not exist yet. Then we run test 2. Test 2 will modify the volume, it will subtract some coins, and it will set up a username. And then we'll run test 1 again, and we'll see that username then exists. And it's kind of complicated, but simple at the same time. So let me run it. Let's take a look at the console output. All right. Oh, wrong. Let's run the right example. And I knew this would happen. This never fails when you change something before doing a demo. I apologize.
That's all right. We derailed you.
Okay. Wait, just go into the sandbox. This is what I wanted to do originally. Let's get rid of JSON settings.
There we go.
Run it again. Boom. Okay, so I had removed it. It created it when I ran it. And I'll show you what all this junk is at the top. But before we do that, test 1 executes, and it says the volume is 0.5. Let's see, the default was 0.5. Coins is 100. The email is bob@fakemail, and username is nil, i.e. it does not exist. Then I ran test 2, and just for those who didn't see it, I print out little test statements here so I can see that this happened, then I ran this, then I print this out to the console, then I run this, then I print this out, and then I run test 1 again. So test 1, the output. Test 2 doesn't produce output, but it does work. Test 1, and if we look at test 2, I randomized the volume setting and I set it. And so in one line I set the value and I saved it. So if I reload this in a moment, we'll see that if I'm going to reload this, the first statement will print out 0.36, 95, Bob, and Bob the Baker for the username.
So essentially test 2 ran, it just didn't It just didn't display anything on the screen.
Yeah, it doesn't have a print statement in it. There are
Right.
no print statements. The job of test2 is to make modifications. I would have better have named this modifier or changer or something to imply that it was doing this. So let me run it again. And so the values the last time were 0.36, 95, Bob at fake mail, and Bob the baker. Now we ran it, 0.36, 95, Bob the fake email, and Bob the baker, demonstrating that it's done everything that we said it was supposed to do. That data has been safely stored, and this time 0.15, 90, etc. And if we take a look at the file, let me bring up my code editor here, we will see a much longer line this time. Username Bob the baker, the default stuff, which is part of the library, it's not one of our settings, and then volume 0.15 and coins 90. I feel like something is missing. Okay, so anyways, what was I going to say? Right, you pointed out something about size. One of the settings that comes with SSK is there's a file called, in the SSK folder, there's a file called load SSK. And if you look at it, among other things, is it tells you what the version number is or the date. And it's got a bunch of flags at the top. Now, the SSK library for people to download has it turned off, and it is measure SSK. Usually it's turned off, but in this version I turned it on. I set it to true. And when it is true, you see this print statement come out in the console. And what this is basically telling you, for people who are curious, is that as it progressed, it measured how much memory was used for each library or set of details. So actually, when it set the globals, that took 34K of memory. When I added extensions to the existing table and display, etc., that took 48K of memory. I made some changes for the Android devices, all this stuff. You can see, hey, I like what's in SSK, but I only want to use the global settings or EDS extensions. Well, if I use just that, that's going to cost me 48K of memory. Or if you look at the whole thing, the whole package, which is the way I like to do it, the whole shebang with everything turned on takes half a meg of memory, which seems like a lot, but I challenge you to write all this stuff all the time. You'd be instantly willing to give up half a meg of storage to be able to write your app in 1/10 of the time, hopefully. I know I am. So
Yes.
And that is
totally run us out of time.
And that is memory usage. Whereas I think what I was talking about was just the size on disk, right?
Right. The size on disk is a little different. So
Yes.
there's two associated costs. There's persistent storage cost. How much does it cost you to include the library and store it as part of your app? But when it runs, all the functionality it puts into memory also takes up space. So this is the space that is required for the variables, for the function definitions, etc., etc.